The dock workers at Meridian Station whispered about Bay 9 like old-timers telling ghost stories around a dying campfire. Said there was a container in there, black as the void between stars, that had been sitting unclaimed for nigh on 7 years. Course, I'd heard the tales, how it hummed when the station's power cycled down, how frost formed on its surface even when the bay ran hot, how 3 different salvage crews had taken one look inside and walked away without a word. Should have listened to those whispers. Should have kept my fool head down and my cargo bay empty, rather than let desperation drive me to that cursed place. But a woman's gotta eat, and the Dusty Rose needed fuel cells something fierce. Name's Captain Vera Ashworth, and I've been running freight through the outer colonies for the better part of 15 years. Started with a crew of 4 and a ship that could outrun anything the law might throw at us. Now it's just me, my agent freighter, and enough debt to buy a small moon. The colonies are drying up, see? Terraforming projects failing. Mining operations shutting down. Whole settlements packing up and heading coreward where the living's easier and the air don't taste like rust and regret. That morning found me nursing synthetic coffee in Sal's cantina, watching the credits in my account dwindle like water in a cracked cistern. The station's artificial dawn was creeping through the grimy viewports, painting everything the color of old blood. Meridian Station wasn't much to look at. A way station built into a hollowed-out asteroid, all twisted corridors and recycled air that tasted like desperation. But it was a crossroads of sorts, where the shipping lanes from 3 different sectors converged like the spokes of a broken wheel. "You look like a woman contemplating poor choices," came a gravelly voice behind me. I turned to find Marcus Webb settling his considerable bulk onto the stool beside mine. Marcus ran the docking authority, which meant he knew every piece of cargo that came and went, every captain's business, and every debt that went unpaid. His cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on me, the red lens reflecting my haggard face back at myself. "Just thinking about opportunities," I said, taking another sip of the bitter coffee. "Opportunities," he chuckled, a sound like grinding gears. "That's a polite way of saying you're broke." Wasn't much point in denying it. Marcus had access to the station's financial records, and my credit rating was lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut. Times are hard all over. They are indeed. He signaled Sal for a drink. Something amber that smelled like it could strip paint. "Which is why I might have something for you, if you're interested in opportunities." I'd known Marcus for 5 years, long enough to recognize when he was fishing. What kind of opportunity? The kind that pays well and asks no questions. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There's a container in Bay 9. Been sitting there so long it's practically part of the station's infrastructure. Original owner's dead, shipping companies dissolved, and the insurance claim expired 3 years ago. Station regulations say anything unclaimed for more than 7 years becomes salvage. And tomorrow marks exactly 7 years and 1 day. His cybernetic eye clicked as it adjusted focus. First captain to file a salvage claim gets whatever's inside, no questions asked. I set down my coffee cup, studying his weathered face. What's the catch, Marcus? There's always a catch. No catch, just local superstition. Dock workers won't go near the thing, claim it's cursed or some such nonsense. He waved a dismissive hand. You strike me as a woman who doesn't put much stock in ghost stories. Truth was, I'd seen enough of the galaxy's dark corners to know that sometimes The things folks called superstition had teeth. But I'd also seen the inside of a debtor's prison on Kepler 7th, and that was a fate worse than any ghost. What's the filing fee? 500 credits. I winced. 500 was nearly everything I had left, but if the container held anything valuable, rare minerals, pre-war tech, even basic manufactured goods, it could be enough to get the Rose back in the black. I'll think about it. Marcus finished his drink and stood, his joints creaking like old leather. Don't think too long, Captain. Word's already spreading. By tomorrow morning, you might not be the only one interested in that particular opportunity. After he left, I sat there staring into my coffee cup like it might hold answers. The cantina was filling up with the morning shift. Miners heading out to the asteroid belt. Traders comparing manifests. A few off-duty station security officers trying to forget whatever they'd seen on the night watch. Normal people living normal lives, not contemplating whether to bet their last credits on a ghost story. But normal people weren't 3 months behind on their ship payments. I paid my tab and made my way through the station's winding corridors toward the docking bays. Meridian Station had been carved out of a nickel-iron asteroid, and the builders hadn't been overly concerned with aesthetics. The walls were bare metal, scarred by decades of use, and the lighting strips buzzed with the kind of electrical problems that came from cutting corners on maintenance. The air recyclers wheezed and coughed, fighting a losing battle against the smell of unwashed bodies, cooking oil, and ozone from overworked power conduits. Bay 9 was in the station's lower levels, down where the artificial gravity was a bit lighter, and the shadows seemed to pool in the corners like spilled ink. The massive blast doors stood open, revealing a cavernous space designed to hold the largest freight haulers. But the bay was nearly empty, just a few scattered containers, and, in the far corner, a single black shipping unit that seemed to absorb the light around it. Even from the entrance, I could feel something wrong about the thing. It was regulation size, 20 feet long, 8 feet wide, 8 feet high, but it squatted in that corner like a tumor, dark and somehow malevolent. The surface was unmarked by any shipping labels or identification codes, just smooth black metal that seemed to drink in the light. Wouldn't go near that thing if I were you, Captain. I turned to find Tommy Nakamura, one of the bay supervisors, approaching with a maintenance tablet in his hands. Tommy was a good man, honest, hard-working, the kind who'd give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. But right now, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Just taking a look, I said. That's how it starts. He glanced toward the container, then quickly looked away. 3 different salvage crews have tried to claim that thing over the years. First one opened it up, took one look inside, and sealed it back up without taking so much as a bolt. Second crew lasted about 10 minutes before they came running out like the devil himself was chasing them. Third crew, he shook his head. Third crew went in with full environmental suits, sensor equipment, the works, came out white as sheets and wouldn't talk about what they'd seen. What do you think's in there? Tommy was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on his tablet. Don't rightly know, Captain, but I've been working these bays for 12 years, and I've never seen anything affect people like that container does. Whatever's in there, it ain't natural. I thanked Tommy and made my way closer to the container. The temperature seemed to drop as I approached, and I could swear I heard something, a low humming, just at the edge of perception, the kind of sound that made your teeth ache and your skin crawl. The container's locking mechanism was standard issue, nothing fancy. A simple electronic seal that would respond to the proper authorization codes. But there were scratches around the lock, deep gouges in the metal that looked almost like claw marks, and the surface of the container was covered in a thin layer of frost, despite the bay's ambient temperature being well above freezing. I reached out to touch the surface, then stopped myself. Whatever was in there had been waiting 7 years. It could wait a little longer. That night, I sat in the Rose's cramped cockpit, staring out at the stars and trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The ship's computer hummed quietly in the background, running diagnostics on systems that were held together with prayer and spare parts. She wasn't much to look at, a Kestrel-class freighter with more miles on her than a circuit preacher. But she'd been my home for 15 years. The thought of losing her to the creditors made my chest tight. I pulled up the station's records on the container, but there wasn't much to find. It had arrived on a freight hauler called the Meridian's Dream 7 years ago, consigned to a company called Helix Dynamics. But Helix had gone bankrupt 6 months later, and the Dream had been scrapped for parts. The container's manifest listed the contents as research materials, but gave no further details. Research materials could be anything from scientific instruments to biological samples to classified military hardware. Or it could be a load of worthless junk that someone had been too embarrassed to claim. But if it was junk, why had 3 salvage crews walked away from it? I was still pondering that question when my comm unit chimed. The caller ID showed Marcus Webb's ugly face, his cybernetic eye glowing red in the display. "Captain Ashworth," he said without preamble. "Thought you should know. Word's gotten out about the container. I've got 2 other captains asking about salvage rights." My blood went cold. "Who?" "Jake Morrison on the Star Dancer, and that Martian, Reeves, who runs the Iron Phoenix. Both of them have deeper pockets than you do, if you catch my meaning." Morrison was a smuggler with connections to half the crime syndicates in the Outer Rim. Reeves was ex-military, the kind of man who'd shoot first and worry about the questions later. Either one of them could outbid me without breaking a sweat. "How long do I have?" I asked. "Station offices open at 0800. First one to file the claim gets the prize." I checked my chronometer. It was nearly midnight, which gave me 8 hours to decide whether to bet everything on a ghost story. "Thanks for the heads up, Marcus. Don't mention it. And Captain, whatever you decide, be careful. I've been running this station for 10 years, and that container, there's something not right about it." The line went dead, leaving me alone with the stars and my thoughts. I could play it safe, use my remaining credits to buy passage back to the core worlds, find work on someone else's ship. It would mean giving up the Rose, giving up 15 years of independence, but it would be the smart thing to do, or I could roll the dice one more time. I spent the next few hours going over the ship's systems, making sure everything was in working order. If I was going to do this, I wanted to be prepared for anything. The Rose might be old, but she had a few tricks up her sleeve. Military-grade sensors, reinforced cargo bay, and a defensive suite that could hold its own against most pirates. If whatever was in that container turned out to be dangerous, at least I'd have a fighting chance. At 0700, I made my way to the station's administrative offices. The corridors were busy with the morning shift change, but I barely noticed the other people. My mind was focused on one thing: getting to that filing window before Morrison or Reeves. The administrative section was a maze of cubicles and waiting areas, all done in the same industrial gray that seemed to be standard throughout the station. I found the salvage office and was relieved to see that I was first in line. The clerk, a bored-looking woman with purple hair and facial tattoos, looked up from her terminal. "Help you. I want to file a salvage claim on container 7749 Delta in Bay 9. She pulled up the records, her eyebrows rising slightly. "That one's been sitting there a while. You sure about this?" "I'm sure. Filing fee is 500 credits. I transferred the money, watching my account balance drop to almost nothing. The clerk processed the paperwork with the kind of efficiency that came from doing the same job 1,000 times, then handed me a data pad to sign. "Congratulations," she said with a smirk. "You're now the proud owner of whatever's in container 7749 Delta. Fair warning, though. Station regulations require you to remove it within 48 hours, or it goes back into unclaimed status." I took the authorization codes and made my way back to Bay 9, my heart pounding like a trip hammer. Whatever was in that container, it was mine now. For better or worse. Tommy was waiting for me when I arrived, along with a small crowd of dockworkers who'd apparently come to watch the show. They kept their distance from the container, clustering near the bay entrance, like they were ready to run at the first sign of trouble. "You really going to open that thing, Captain?" Tommy asked. "That's the plan." "Well, if you don't mind some advice from an old hand, keep your environmental suit sealed and your comm unit open. And if you see anything that doesn't look right, you get out of there fast." I nodded and made my way to the container. Up close, the humming was more pronounced, a low vibration that seemed to come from deep inside the metal box. The frost on the surface had grown thicker overnight, forming intricate patterns that looked almost like writing in some alien script. I plugged the authorization codes into the lock mechanism and stepped back as the seals disengaged with a sharp hiss. The container's doors swung open slowly, revealing an interior filled with swirling mist that glowed with a faint blue light. The smell hit me first, ozone and copper, like the air after a lightning strike. Then I saw what was inside, and my blood turned to ice in my veins. The container was bigger on the inside than it should have been, the walls stretching away into a blue-lit distance that defied the laws of physics. And floating in that impossible space, suspended in columns of crackling energy, were dozens of transparent cylinders. Each one contained a human figure, perfectly preserved, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that some of the cylinders were empty, their contents long since released. And in the shadows at the far end of the container, something moved. I stumbled backward, my hand reaching for the comm unit on my belt, but before I could call for help, the thing in the shadows stepped into the light. It had been human once. I could tell that much, but whatever had been done to it had changed it into something else entirely. Its skin was pale as starlight, stretched tight over bones that were too long and joints that bent in ways that made my eyes water. Its face was a ruin of surgical scars and cybernetic implants, and when it smiled, I could see rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Finally," it said, its voice like grinding metal. Someone with the courage to open the door. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The thing stepped out of the container with movements that were too fluid, too graceful for anything that had once been human. Behind it, more shapes emerged from the shadows. A dozen creatures that might have been people once, before someone had decided to improve upon the original design. 7 years we've waited, the first creature continued, circling me like a predator sizing up its prey. 7 years of listening to the whispers outside, dreaming of freedom. Do you know what we are, little captain? I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Research materials. It laughed, a sound like breaking glass. In a manner of speaking, we were Helix Dynamics' greatest achievement, the next step in human evolution. Enhanced strength, improved reflexes, extended lifespans. The perfect soldiers for humanity's expansion into the dark between the stars. What went wrong? Wrong. It tilted its head, studying me with eyes that glowed like blue stars. Nothing went wrong. We were everything they designed us to be, but they made one small error in their calculations. What error? They assumed we would remain loyal to our creators. The creature reached out with one elongated hand, its fingers ending in claws that could have opened a man like a tin can. But instead of striking, it simply touched my face, its skin cold as ice. We killed them all, it whispered. Every scientist, every technician, every security guard who stood between us and freedom. But before we could escape, they managed to trap us in that container, suspended in stasis, waiting for someone foolish enough to open the door. I could hear shouting from the bay entrance, Tommy and the other dock workers calling my name, but they sounded impossibly far away. The creature's touch was spreading a numbing cold through my body, and I could feel my strength ebbing away like water through a broken dam. Don't worry, it said, its voice almost gentle now. We won't kill you. You've given us our freedom, and we're not ungrateful, but we will need your ship. My ship. How else are we to reach the core worlds? There are billions of humans there, waiting to be improved, waiting to join us in the next phase of evolution. The cold was spreading through my chest now, making it hard to breathe. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a spark of anger was kindling. This thing wanted to use my ship, the Rose, my home for 15 years, to spread its poison to the innocent people of the core worlds, like hell. I'd kept one secret from the creature and its companions, one last card to play. The Rose wasn't just any freighter. She'd been built for the Colonial Defense Force, back when the Outer Rim was still contested territory. Most of her military systems had been stripped out when she was sold to civilian owners, but I'd managed to keep one particularly useful feature, a remote detonation system for the cargo bay. It was designed to prevent pirates from stealing sensitive cargo, but it would work just as well for preventing monsters from stealing my ship. I triggered the system with a thought, my neural implant interfacing with the Rose's computer. The creature must have sensed something, because its grip tightened on my face, claws digging into my skin. What did you do? It hissed. Gave you what you deserve, I managed to say. The explosion lit up Bay 9 like a miniature star, vaporizing the container and everything within a 50-meter radius. The blast wave knocked me flat, my ears ringing, and my vision filled with dancing spots. But when the smoke cleared, the creatures were gone, reduced to their component atoms by the fury of a military-grade demolition charge. I lay there on the deck plates, staring up at the bay's ceiling and trying to convince myself that I was still alive. My face felt like it had been frostbitten, and I could taste blood in my mouth, but I was breathing. That had to count for something. Tommy was the first to reach me, his face pale with shock. "Captain! Captain, are you all right?" "Been better," I croaked, "but I'm alive." What the hell was in that container? I thought about trying to explain. The impossible space, the suspended figures, the creatures that had once been human. But who would believe such a story? Better to let them think it had been some kind of industrial accident. "Unstable materials," I said. "Good thing I had the Rose rigged for remote detonation." It took 3 days for the station's emergency crews to clear the debris from Bay 9. The official report listed the incident as an accidental explosion caused by volatile research chemicals, and I didn't bother to correct them. Sometimes the truth was more dangerous than a comfortable lie. Marcus Webb visited me in the station's medical bay, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on the frostbite scars on my face. "Heard you had some excitement with that container." "You could say that. Find anything valuable?" I thought about the creatures, about the billions of people in the core worlds who would never know how close they'd come to a nightmare beyond imagining. "Nothing worth keeping." He nodded, accepting the lie with the wisdom of a man who'd learned not to ask too many questions. "Well, there's a silver lining to all this. Station insurance is covering the damage to your ship, plus a hazardous cargo bonus. Should be enough to get you back in the black." It was. The insurance payout cleared my debts and left me with enough credits to overhaul the Rose's aging systems. I could have used the money to retire, find a nice quiet planet somewhere, and spend my remaining years in peace. But the galaxy was full of dark corners and dangerous secrets, and someone had to stand between them and the innocent people just trying to live their lives. Besides, the Rose and I had been through too much together to quit now. 3 weeks later, I was back in space, running a cargo of medical supplies to a mining colony in the Kepler system. The stars looked the same as they always had, cold and distant and beautiful. But I found myself checking the long-range sensors more often than usual, watching for ships that might be carrying cargo they shouldn't, containers that might hold more than their manifests claimed. The dock workers at Meridian Station had stopped talking about Bay 9. The new container that occupied that corner was filled with perfectly ordinary machine parts, and the bay supervisor reported no unusual incidents. But sometimes, late at night when the station's power cycled down, Tommy Nakamura would swear he could still hear humming in the shadows. I never told him that I heard it too. The thing about ghost stories is that they usually have some truth buried in them, like ore veins running through solid rock. The dock workers had been right to fear that container, right to whisper warnings to anyone who would listen. They'd just been wrong about one thing. The curse hadn't been in the container itself. It had been in the choice to open it, to let curiosity and desperation override common sense and caution. But sometimes, when the stakes are high enough, and the alternatives are worse than the risk, a person has to make that choice anyway. That's the real curse of the frontier, not ghosts or monsters or things that go bump in the night, but the knowledge that someone has to stand watch in the darkness. Someone has to be willing to open the containers that others fear to touch, to face the nightmares that hide in the spaces between the stars. It's a hard life, but it's an honest one. And as I guided the Rose through the star-scattered void toward whatever waited in the next port, I found myself almost looking forward to it. After all, the galaxy was a big place, full of mysteries and dangers and wonders beyond imagining. And somewhere out there, another container was waiting to be opened. I just hoped that when the time came, I'd have the wisdom to know which one should stay sealed forever.